Last year, I did a video on my favorite media that I checked out in 2022, and it was a lot of fun to make, so I figured I'd do another one for 2023. I kept track of everything that qualified for this through a media thread on Twitter, so all the games, movies, and shows that were eligible are on there. A couple more ground rules I have to set that I didn't last year are that games are eligible if I played through the majority of them and finished them in 2023 even if I'd started them beforehand, and shows count up to the point where I finished them, but they don't count if I started them in a previous year and finished at least a full season, then caught up on them, or they concluded in 2023. So all of these on screen right now are not eligible. There are also a lot of honorable mentions I could bring up, but in the interest of saving time, I'll just be having them play on screen instead of vocally mentioning each of them. Everything you've seen in this intro I love to no end and would happily rewatch or replay whenever. You could definitely argue a lot of these deserve to make the list over some of the things that I did pick, but I'm not doing any kind of critical analysis for this. It is no deeper than a list of favourites that I had the most fun with or connected the most with personally. And don't take the rankings themselves that seriously. Not only are these all subject to change, since a few of my honourable mentions from last year would have made the list if I was to remake it nowadays, but I'm also going back and forth between different mediums a lot more this time, which are inherently not as directly comparable. Also, a spoiler warning for the vast majority of the list. If I start talking about something you still want to go in blind for, then I've got each segment timestamped so you can skip ahead. Not much more to it than that, now let's get into the cream of the crop.
We love Mario Kart, don't we, guys? We love Mario Kart!
Surprise, this was all just a ploy to talk about Mario Kart again. I specifically increased this from a top 10 to a top 12 for that purpose alone. Yeah, I finally played 8 Deluxe, and it is a strong contender for the best game in this series. As much as I love Wii like my firstborn child, this one does slightly surpass it in my eyes. This game has it all. Tight controls, the largest and most varied track selection in the series, gorgeous art direction except when it isn't, a banging soundtrack, every staple of the Mario Kart franchise. It arguably didn't innovate as much as other games in the series, since a lot of its gimmicks are riding off the back of what 7 introduced or brought back into the limelight, but this one does enough by expanding on all those gimmicks and adding anti-gravity. And that's just the base game. Deluxe brought back double item boxes, introduced another level of drifting, added an actual battle mode which is a ton of fun. It really is all the best stuff in these games in one phenomenal package. Maybe the tracks don't quite surpass Wii or 7 when you average everything out, but expecting that to be the case with such a huge volume of courses isn't really fair. Besides, this has most of the best tracks from every other entry in the series while lacking most of their weak links. I can count on my fingers the amount of courses I dislike, while it has more S and A tier tracks than most other games have, making up their entire selection list. I can't wait to talk about them when I inevitably rank all of them. I guess since I'll be talking about it again in the future, I can leave this segment off here. Long story short, this game is excellent, and you probably already know that because the odds are you've played it at least once if these sales are anything to go off.
I'm talking to you, Scott Pilgrim.
Funnily enough, the Scott Pilgrim comics are the version of the story that I'm the least familiar with. The movie adaptation was my first exposure to it, which I really loved. I started the game and enjoyed what I played of it despite never finishing, and now we have the anime adaptation, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. I'm really bummed that I ended up getting spoiled on the premise of this show, because the ending to episode 1 would have really caught me off guard. Even if it didn't have the initial shock value when I watched it though, I think it's a very novel concept to take this story and shift the focus from the expected protagonist to some of the less developed side characters. The 7 Evil X's have gone from hilarious joke dispensaries to hilarious actual characters with arcs and emotional weight behind some scenes. The scene with Ramona and Roxy in particular is a contender for my favourite in the show. I loved how it delved into how their relationship ended. Scott himself luckily doesn't get completely shafted, unlike what Twitter may have led you to believe. They lost me at first with the weird time travel stuff, but drew me back in with the conflict that arose between Scott and his older self. And thankfully, it has every other positive that I associate with the movie, from its stellar action to its fantastic sense of humour. And while I love how the movie looks, this one has the obvious advantage of being animated, so it gets to be much more expressive and cartoony with its wonderful art style without having the inherent limitations in that area that comes from live action. Definitely give this a watch if you've got a few hours to spare. And if Wallace isn't one of your favourite characters by the end, then I don't even know what to say. Same goes for if you don't watch the English dub that they got the movie's cast back for. I usually don't have a preference provided the subtitles are legible or the English voice acting is well directed, but this is the one case where dub is the only way to go for me. There's never going to be another anime with Chris Evans in it, you gotta let me have this.
I'm surprised people like it.
Your Superman movie better have 10 times the crying raccoons or you're finished.
If there's one thing I've become more burned out on hearing about than any other franchise out there, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I love the Infinity Saga, but I've kinda had my fill of this franchise, and Phases 4 and 5 hadn't delivered on all that much for me to say that I loved. No Way Home was the outlier for a while. The rest of what I saw I enjoyed decently enough, and not much more, with a lot of them worsening over time in my mind. I was just about ready to move on from this franchise, but I knew there was one last project that I absolutely had to see before then. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is one of my favourite MCU movies. It does have the same set of problems you'd expect from an MCU movie, with a handful of lame jokes, predictable payoffs, and tonal whiplash, and yet, for every misstep, this movie takes several more forwards, delivering on tons of satisfying arcs and conclusions for this wonderful cast of characters. I think basically everyone here got a satisfying send-off. Drax realizing he's better off as a dad than a destroyer, Peter going back home, Mantis finally gaining her independence and going to do something on her own, 2014 Gamora finding a new family with the Ravagers, Nebula sticking around nowhere to help them rebuild, and Rocket becoming the new leader of the Guardians. I don't think there's anyone I'm unsatisfied with here. Adam Warlock's portrayal seems to be divisive, but I don't mind it though. I didn't expect him to have much to do with the overarching franchise now that the Infinity Stones are gone, and he provides more than his fair share of great jokes. He goes from getting the most intimidating intro for an MCU antagonist this side of Thanos, to getting his ass beat by people leagues weaker than him for most of the movie, and I find that concept hilarious. The whole movie's pretty funny actually. I've always loved the writing style for these Guardians films, and the actors all have great chemistry with each other. The first MCU F-bomb is everything I could have wanted it to be. And I don't think I need to talk about all the hard-hitting emotional moments, because if you've seen it, then you already get it. The story gets a lot darker than I'd expect from a Marvel flick, with Rocket in particular proving to have perhaps the most tragic life of any character in this series. The High Evolutionary put this man through hell, which, coupled with an amazing performance, makes him one of my favourite villains in the entire franchise. Maybe even slightly outdoing Ego from the second film. It is unfortunate the hand James Gunn was dealt, having to work around how Infinity War and Endgame irreversibly changed the trajectory of the story, but I think he was able to turn this into one of the MCU's crowning achievements. This trilogy holds a special place in my heart, with the first one getting me into the MCU, the second one being one of my favourite films in general, and now the third one acting as one final ride with these characters I hold so near and dear to me, sending them and my investment in this franchise off on a high note.
Batman is put at a huge disadvantage because Spider-Man took the camera away from him.
I don't have a whole lot to say about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and this was one of the final segments that I wrote as the video was getting longer than I wanted, so I want to try and keep this one fairly brief. I have never watched an episode of Batman the Animated Series, and yet this managed to cement itself as one of my favourite DC films, possibly my absolute favourite behind only The Dark Knight. The late Kevin Conroy gives an excellent performance for Batman, and the film gives some of the most compelling characterization I've ever seen for him, finally finding someone who can make him happy, which gets him to question if he even wants to continue being a vigilante now that he has something else to live for. The I didn't count on being happy scene is especially heartbreaking. The animation is solid and has some really cool imagery. The action scenes are great, with the maskless chase being really tense since he can't even let his pursuers see him. I actually cared about the love interest and her backstory. The main mystery behind the villain is compelling, even if they do cheat a little with how their body type is changed. Mark hamming it up as the Joker is delightful. It's an overall fantastic movie. Far better than any initially planned direct-to-video film based on a cartoon has any right to be. Definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it. It's barely over an hour, what do you got to lose?
Oh my gosh! It's happening! Everybody, it's happening!
Back when I'd first heard about Kaguya-sama Love is War when I was in high school, I wasn't exactly enticed to check it out. All I'd heard was that it was a romance series, something I am inherently not interested in. And then the unfunny meme templates going around were not doing much to sway me. Then the first time I think I'd heard anyone talk about the series in any kind of depth was when Shea Frillis did a video on it after season 2 had wrapped up. His description of it actually got me intrigued. So I checked it out, and now here I am talking about it as one of my favourite anime that I've ever seen. So those who know me may also know that I don't care about romance at all. It's not something I can really get into as easily, which is entirely a me thing, not at all an attempt at actual criticism, and stories focusing on it tend to lose me, or at the very least be my least favourite aspect of a story I'm otherwise super invested in. It's not impossible to get me to care, of course. I just tend to prefer when characters have good chemistry that can sell me on them as a couple, or the story is told in a fun and creative way. Love is War has both of those in spades. Our main duo, Kaguya and Miyuki, are very compelling characters, and it's so fun to see every elaborate plan plan they set up to try and get the other to confess their love to them. All while the relationship develops from an academic rivalry with the two butting heads to them genuinely growing to love and care for each other. I even got a little emotional during the season 3 finale, which is one of the few cases on this list where I don't want to spoil a thing about it if you haven't seen it. There are plenty of other fantastic emotional beats for just about every central character. The penultimate episode of season 2 stands out as my favourite episode of the show for how much more it made me respect Ishigami's character, which is quite possibly the coldest take I have ever had on this channel. What I especially respect about this show is that on top of the compelling drama, it's able to balance being really damn funny. The characters all banter with each other amazingly, and the animation is endlessly expressive and creative. The voice acting is some of the best I've heard in any anime as well. I've only fully watched the sub version, but the dub is no slouch either. It might no longer have the main character sharing a voice with Saitama, but it does have the greatest narrator I have ever heard in anything. The greatest way I can sell him to you is by saying that he is essentially Whis from Dragon Ball hopped up on cocaine. If that doesn't get you to check it out, then nothing will. Granted, it has its fair share of dud jokes and side plots that I'm not a fan of. When it misses the mark, it misses hard and has me rolling my eyes. But when it hits even harder with so many characters, episodes, and arcs that I absolutely adore. There's so much more I could talk about that I unfortunately don't have the time to today. So take my word for it and check it out for yourself if you haven't seen it.
Indiana Jones, cool.
I just got the first 3 because
The fourth one blows.
I did not grow up with Indiana Jones. I played the LEGO games, but never actually watched any of the movies. Well, with Dial of Destiny coming out in the summer, I figured I'd finally check them out in preparation. I did not end up watching Dial of Destiny. Raiders was excellent like everyone says, Temple of Doom was pretty good even if it was the obvious weak link in the trilogy, and Crystal Skull, but my favourite has to be Last Crusades. I had to pause to go do something else during the scene when they were in the library, and I thought, oh man, I was getting into that. Too bad I have to break up the viewing only 10 minutes in. Then I saw I was at the half-hour mark, which says more than anything else I ever could. This feels like the natural apex of the story. Like, how do you realistically go further than a hunt for the Holy Grail used by Jesus Christ himself? How do you further the characters beyond Indy meeting his father again after so long and finally reconciling with him? Don't say nukes and aliens. Henry is such a great addition to the movie. It's fun seeing someone who can actually throw Indy off, and I bought the connection they had. When he got shot at the end, it helped to up the stakes to get the Grail, and the ultimate resolution where Indy and his dad let the Grail fall to help each other is really emotionally powerful. That's probably why it's my favourite, honestly. It's just the most emotionally resonant Indiana Jones movie for me, as well as the funniest, while keeping up the standard that the first two set for the music, action, and stunt work. The only weak part to me was the romance subplot, which has always been an area these movies have failed to hold my interest in, but it's only prominent in like 2 or 3 scenes and it's in service of the villains furthering the plot, so who really cares? Everything else about this works for me. I had a blast watching it. The ending especially is perfect. Beyond there being nowhere else you could want to take the characters or their quest beyond this, there's no better shot to end this franchise on than Indy, his father, and their friend riding off on horseback into the sunset.
Oh, I have anxiety.
Towards the end of 2022, there were 2 big seasonal anime that I have seen everywhere in the year following their release, both of which I watched the first season for, but haven't read ahead in the manga. Those being Bocchi the Rock and Chainsaw Man. I can't believe we got anime Barbenheimer and never even noticed. And as great as Chainsaw Man was, I connected with Bocchi a lot more. The main thing the show is known for is how it plays around with the animation for the visual gags. I mean, everyone's seen the clip of Bocchi glitching out on the ground or her getting crushed through the wall as a 3D model, but those aren't outliers. The visual gags, comedic timing, and overall sense of humour for the show are incredibly strong. It devolves into insanity so frequently, and I love it. One of my personal favourites is when Bocchi immediately goes on the black market to try and sell a kidney as soon as she's told she might have to get a job. What I can respect even more though is that it does have an off switch. It knows when jokes wouldn't be appropriate and lets the serious character moments play out, whether it be 2 of them opening up about their life goals or one of the really fun musical performance scenes. One of them even acts as a way to show how far Bocchi has come with her social anxiety as she keeps her cool and plays on even after her guitar breaks mid-performance. Oh yeah, social anxiety. The show tackles that in a way that manages to both be really funny and make Bocchi a really compelling main character. When she was worried that Rio would hate her song lyrics, but then got even more worried that she would pretend to like them anyway, I felt that one in my soul. I think even though this doesn't quite reach the peaks of some of the competition, it managed to rank this high because I don't think it has any major problems that drag it down for me. I was bracing myself for the obligatory obnoxious character or annoying fan service episodes, but neither of those happened. The characters and overall episodes managed to remain consistently entertaining. If the wacky sense of humour doesn't seem like it'd click with you, then probably give this one a miss, yeah. But if you've seen clips going around and liked them, then I'd recommend giving the show a watch. It's a ton of fun.
Don't blink! Ow!
At some point in 2022, one of my friends made it his mission to let all his friends know about this indie game called Before Your Eyes. I hadn't heard of it before, but at some point in 2023, I decided, sure, I'll check it out. So I downloaded it on Steam, and wow, I loved this even more than I expected to. The main gimmick of this game is that you can control it by blinking as long as you have your webcam on. And sure, the calibration isn't perfect, but that didn't really get in the way much of my enjoyment. I still thought it was a fun control scheme, and there's always the option to turn it off and use your mouse if you don't want to. But personally, I much prefer keeping it on. This is one of those interactive movie kind of games, which I normally don't much care for. At that point, just make a movie or a Netflix special. But the blinking mechanic makes it so much more immersive in my opinion. You can be in the middle of a beautiful moment and not want things to progress, so you keep your eyes open for as long as possible, but eventually you have to keep the story moving. There are some parts where keeping your eyes open for long enough becomes a genuine struggle that really adds to the tension of the scene. Same goes for another bit that plays around with your mouse sensitivity. I've been keeping vague on the story details and avoiding using footage from later in the game because I don't want to spoil a thing about where this story goes. It's genuinely devastating. Eric Edelstein, who I previously only knew as Grizz from We Bare Bears, gives possibly my favourite vocal performance on this list. This man goes through the fucking emotional ringer multiple times, but he puts on a brave face for his family. His voice has this comforting warmth and sincerity, and you feel so bad for him with everything he has to go through. Ultimately though, the ending is legitimately beautiful, even if it isn't the happiest in context. If you want to know what I'm talking about, then please seek it out, it's fantastic. It's only a quarter of the price of your average AAA game, and that's if you buy the deluxe edition with the art book and the soundtrack when it's not even on sale. It's one of my favourite games of all time, and if this video can introduce even one person to it, then that's a win in my book.
It goes really well with my giant robot.
Kirby is a series I've wanted to get more into for a while. I'd only played Nightmare and Dreamland and Amazing Mirror before this year, and I loved them. Then I checked out Triple Deluxe as the 3DS eShop was closing, and I adored it. Then I'd heard that was the weaker 3DS Kirby title, so of course I picked up Planet Robobot as soon as I could. Then when I had some time to kill on a trip that I was taking with some friends, I completed the entire game in a few days, and wow, this was amazing. By far my favourite of the Kirby games that I've played so far. This isn't like most of the other things on this list where I got super emotionally invested in the story or anything. I mean, the story to this game is good and there is some solid tragic stuff hidden away if you're willing to look for it, but this ranks so high by virtue of being pure unbridled power fantasy that I had a blast with. While it's unfortunate that we lost Belle and Beetle from Triple Deluxe, the copy ability roster here is pretty excellent, and the new ones are among my favourites. The real highlight here though is the titular Robobot, which is a far more compelling gimmick than Hypernova ever was. As much as I loved Hypernova, it was also very one note. The Robobot on the other hand is worked into a lot more puzzles and has a ton of variety in different playstyles. I thought there were only going to be about 3 or 4 modes for it, but it can copy about half of the abilities in the game, meaning you're going to be discovering new playstyles for a while. On top of that, the puzzles are really creative and fun. I enjoyed scouring for all the code cubes, the boss fights are great, and getting to become the halberd for the final boss is sick as hell. I love trying to get through Meta Nightmare as fast as I could, and the true arena was a truly grueling gauntlet of challenges that I still have not managed to beat. Yeah, sorry, the final surprise stage of that with no healing options might be a little overkill. And the half hour of wheel flip jumping each attempt to get through it takes means it's not really worth going for 100% for me. Props to anyone who can get through it though, you're stronger than me. Oh well, one annoyingly tedious final challenge in an optional side mode isn't going to take away anything from a game I otherwise adored about every second of from start to finish. The only negative experience I had with the main game was when I beat a boss that looked like it would give me the UFO ability, and then it gave me Spark, which is one of the few that I don't really like. Then I found out that UFO is in the game, but it's locked behind 100% completion or having an amiibo. Why the fuck would you show it to me if I can't have it?
Ow! Mother of Godzilla!
Godzilla is a series that I wish I could get into. Not that I've tried and not liked the movies, I just haven't come across many of them. I had fun with the MonsterVerse movies for what it's worth. Shin Godzilla was alright, but I definitely need to rewatch it now that I'm no longer 15 years old and can actually engage with it. Godzilla 1998, but none of those are my favourite that I've seen. That goes to the new kid on the block, Godzilla -1. Godzilla in this is a goddamn menace. You feel the weight and terror of his presence anytime he does anything. And the plans the humans come up with to take him down are so fucking sick and creative. And when he's rampaging, he poses a legit threat to the characters' lives. I never felt like I knew who was gonna live or die at any given time. And holy hell, the atomic breath he lets out on Ginza. That is straight up the most impactful attack in anything I saw all year. How the fuck did they pull that off? How does does it all look this good? Much less on a budget, less than a tenth of what your average typical much worse looking blockbuster gets. I hope that does not mean there were hellish working conditions. Everything Godzilla related in this Godzilla movie is fittingly awesome, engaging, exciting, terrifying, and it is not my favourite part of this film. There's a stigma with this franchise that I see a lot, mainly with the MonsterVerse films, which admittedly in those cases isn't undeserved, which is that kaiju action good, human drama bad. And obviously that's not a fair generalization. If the human stuff is boring and takes away from the cool monster action like it did in King of the Monsters, then fair enough. But if there is compelling human stuff, then I don't think dismissing it outright for not being big spectacle action is giving it its fair shake. And that absolutely applies to this film. I love the side characters and supporting cast, but Koichi in particular is such a gripping central protagonist. A kamikaze pilot that turned tail and ran from his duty, who hesitated to shoot Godzilla in their first encounter, forced to endure the nightmare PTSD and survivor's guilt for as long as the big lizard continues to wreak havoc. I found his relations with Noriko and Akiko so compelling as this unrelated group of people who clearly do love and care for each other like a family, but they can't be one while Koichi is still haunted by the horrors of his past. They're only forced to stay together because of the whole war situation going on. I don't want to spoil much about this film since it is still new, so all I'll say in regards to spoilery thoughts on the ending is that I initially found one aspect of it a slightly overly optimistic cop-out at first, and then I fully came around to it because I was just happy to see these characters catch a goddamn break. I got so emotionally wrapped up in the human character drama in this Godzilla movie that I legitimately forgot Godzilla was even in it at multiple intervals. Which sounds like a detriment, but really, it's just a showing of how phenomenal this film is in every way. One of my favourite films I've ever seen. And with the exception of Everything Everywhere All at Once and a few Marvel flicks that I have a bias towards, my absolute favourite movie that I've ever had the pleasure of seeing on the big screen.
Mars, you're gonna have to start sticking up for yourself, mate.
Into the Spider-Verse is one of my favourite movies of all time. So of course I was delighted that the second part of this phenomenal trilogy kept that good streak going and delivered on just about everything that made the first film so amazing. I still prefer Into for being able to be more self-contained, and the high points like the Leap of Faith remain untouched, but Across isn't too far off. It's every bit as funny and compelling to follow, developing Miles as a hero and as a person further, introducing plenty of new amazing side characters, and turning the Spot from a joke to a legitimately menacing villain that I absolutely loved watching tear shit up. I can't wait to see what Beyond does with him and all of his exaggerated swagger of a cosmic horror beyond your comprehension. Hell, I do think this manages to one-up the original in a few ways. Like, the animation somehow. You're never gonna catch me saying the first movie is anything less than one of the best looking things I've ever seen in my life, but Across is able to play around even more with different animation styles and even more insane action set pieces, and it all looks so fucking incredible. The conditions the animators working on it had to go through were fucked, that should go without saying, and I really hope they get better treatment for part 3. But the fruits of their labour for this movie should not go unpraised. Every single frame is beautiful, and a few of the characters even get better development. I found Gwen a lot more compelling here than I did before. Same goes for Miles' parents. Jeff also gets one of my favourite line reads ever. It took me out both times I saw it in cinemas. He just sincerely wants to know why Spider-Man would have created that guy. And while it's a shame that this one doesn't stand out on its own as much, acting as the bridge between the other two films, I think the cliffhanger ending was handled about as well as it could have been. The reveal of Earth-42 Miles as the Prowler caught me so off guard, and I'm excited to see how our Miles and his friends are going to fight him off. Beyond the Spider-Verse is going to have so much going on. I really hope they're able to stick the landing. And if it maintains this high level of quality, then I think this will end up being my new favourite film trilogy, period. I don't need to go on about this any longer. This movie was the talk of the town all summer. You've heard every good thing there is to say about it, and they're all true. So let's move on to the one thing that I liked slightly better.
Whoa, what a cool mountain! How did you get here?
The number one spot on this list has been clear to me for months. Celeste is one of the greatest works of art I've ever experienced in my life. I am in disbelief at how well this works for me with both its story and its gameplay. Let's tackle gameplay first, since that's much easier to cover. This is some of the best movement in any game I've ever played. Quick enough to be exciting, but never overwhelming. And if you do need to take a minute to stop and breathe, the game allows you to do so pretty much whenever you want. You can take as much time as you need to map out where's best to climb, jump, and use your mid-air dash to get around. There's a lot of trial and error involved, but it's never bothersome because it's never unfair. You're allowed to pick up each new mechanic for yourself as you go along with a very natural difficulty curve and puzzles that are incredibly satisfying to figure out. Part of that satisfaction comes from the difficulty. The game can be pretty brutal with the precision it can require from you, and yet it never becomes bothersome. Partly because a lot of it can come from the optional collectible strawberries, which the game tells you are for bragging rights only, so you don't have to bother if you don't want to. A lot of the trickier stuff can be entirely self-imposed. And yet, I found so much satisfaction in picking up as many of them as I could that I would go after every single one I could find in these highly explorable levels with plenty of optional areas. Hell, if anything, my only gripe with this game is that you can sometimes accidentally take the required main path when you're not done exploring side areas, and then you can't go back without restarting the level. That's mildly annoying, but also a testament to how fun these side challenges are. If the game is still too much for you, there is an option for an easy mode that'll let you breeze through with no danger. I never found myself using it though, since that would have taken away a lot of the satisfaction after clearing each area after dozens upon dozens of deaths each. That sounds like it should be tilting, but it really isn't because the game is more respectful of your time than any other platformer that I've played. There are no overly long death screens or respawn times, there's no unnecessary repetition in doing the same parts of the level you already done. You die and you're back at the start of the room with all collectibles still saved since last you touched the ground. You can get right back into it without the pacing stalling at all. That's what's so cool about the gameplay here. With its accessibility features and options to take things at your own pace, you can make it as breezy or as difficult as you want. Ultimately though, even though I'm far from an expert at it, my preferred way was to take the challenge head on, because that plays into my favourite thing about this game: the story. This game follows Madeline climbing a mountain on a journey of self-improvement, befriending and trying to help those she comes across and confronting the parts of herself that she isn't all that proud of. And the game's difficulty fully mirrors how difficult it can be to push yourself to be better and more authentic to your true self, with the memorial partway up the mountain to pay respect to those who fell on the climb. I could talk about all the other charming side characters who I greatly enjoy, especially Theo. He's great and I love the part where he helps Madeline through her panic attack, but Madeline herself is who I find myself connecting with the most. Her desire to do right in spite of the parts of her personality she doesn't like, the parts that make her think she's meaner than she is, cement her as one of the most identifiable protagonists I've seen in, well, anything really. I felt every triumph alongside her with each completed level, sympathised with the anxiety she mentioned going through, admired her determination to climb back up even after dropping back to the bottom of the mountain, and got immensely invested in the scene where she makes peace with her other half. Those are parts of her, she'll never be fully rid of them, but she learns to embrace and accept herself for who she is, and continues to push forward with her climb. It is one of the most emotionally effective scenes in any piece of media for me. On top of that, the game has a beautiful pixel art style, lovely music, a great sense of humour, wonderful chemistry between the characters, everything I could want in a game really, and I still haven't seen everything there is to see in it. I'm yet to collect the B-side tapes and unlock the final post-game level, though I do intend to at some point. The million-dollar question then: is this my new favourite game of all time? I'm not sure about that. I think I do enjoy the characters and humour of Portal 2 a little more, and the multiplayer of that one likely edges out slightly in the gameplay department. Either way, it's neck and neck between them. Maybe it'll change when I go for 100% completion, who knows. Celeste is still a masterpiece, and without a doubt my favourite piece of media that I checked out in 2023. I look forward to checking out even more stuff in the following years, and maybe finding something that I like even more. Leave some recommendations in the comments. I'm always down to check out some new stuff. Anyway, number 0 is Chuck E. Cheese in the Galaxy 5000.